Were you watching the press conference?
I watched the press conference from first to last.
What was going on in your mind when you saw that play out and then what happened to Jim later in the night?
Well, every time I watch the president or see something he's done or read one of his tweets, I think, well, I didn't think he'd go this far, or I didn't think he'd say that. And I'm always surprised because, in fact, he goes this far. Farther, he says worse. And when I watched the way he lashed out, knowing that he was on television, but I think knowing that he was speaking to his base against Jim Acosta, I was surprised. I have never seen a president do that. I know they're unhappy with us, the reporters. I know presidents I covered didn't like me or didn't certainly like some of the questions I asked, but they never did that. They never lashed out at me in public. Maybe they'd rage in their office with their cronies about how unfair I was in their minds, but they didn't try to make it public because they knew that Harry Truman admonition was correct. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Do you feel like the media is just sort of a pawn in this one a little bit? Because I go back to the fact that, by my count, Acosta was the fourth reporter. Trump calls on him in that press conference to ask a question. It felt like a bit of a setup to me.
Well, I don't know about a setup, and I'll say this. I think presidents would complain about what I did. They never tried to lift my press credentials, and they had a right to complain. And I should listen to if they, send word that I didn't think you were fair on that, or I thought you got it wrong. Of course I listened. But in the case of what we saw the other night, we can discuss and even disagree on whether Acosta was pressing it too hard. When they tried to take a microphone away from him, perhaps he should not have persisted in continuing to try to get Trump to answer the question. Now, that's a legitimate discussion. But the fact that Trump seems to feel that his question somehow was unfair or wrong and deserved a tongue lashing, Trump was wrong, not Acosta.
What does the media do in this environment? Double down?
I don't know.
What's your advice to the media?
My advice has always been, for instance, many months ago, there was a long discussion about whether you called Donald J. Trump a liar. Just said it as a reporter, or said it as a newspaper, or said it as a broadcast entity. And my advice was, we'd rather say, when we have the evidence, that the facts are not on his side, that he's not telling the truth when it comes to what is actually happening. The word liar is pejorative. And yes, a lot of people think it applies to Donald J. Trump. But you've asked me, as reporters, as the press, how should we respond? I think still, if I had been at a press conference and been called on by President Trump, I might have tried to form a question to get him to answer a matter of public concern, and I might have tried to press him. But I would have tried to do it respectfully, and I certainly wouldn't have called him a name back. And Acosta, you notice, was on a serious provocation. He stood up, he was trying to saying something, but he didn't stand up and start shouting at the president, "How dare you say this about me?" On what? And he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have. Let the public decide. If we do our job and we continue to bring information that's factual, that counters what Donald J. Trump says when it's not factual, eventually the American public will figure it out. Abraham Lincoln once said that he had confidence in the judgment of the American people, and I think he was right. We'll figure it out.
So do we need to approach these press conferences, these daily press briefings, differently because that's their stage and they get to control more there than everywhere
Well,
else?
of course.
Just go report instead of cater to those?
We have fewer daily briefings from Sarah Huckabee Sanders because they turned into just a denunciation of the press. She doesn't answer questions. She doesn't say, I take the question and go try to find out the answer for you, and so you can take it to your readers or your audience. She just announces the press and calls them names. Now, reporters are human beings, thank goodness. Someday maybe we'll be all replaced by robots, but and I used to tell politicians, I used to lecture at the Army War College to young, bright, upcoming officers and people in the CIA and all of that, and say, if a reporter comes to you with an uncomfortable question, do not immediately assume or treat that reporter as an enemy. Welcome it in, try to tell him what you can, keep your cool, don't get in a match of insult, try to get your side of the story over. And reporters I know in Washington were almost uniformly willing to listen, willing to look at what their story was, the facts and all of this, not just say, I'm going to do a hatchet job on this person and enter the office. But we are human. And if you're going to treat us as the enemy, we have to work very hard to keep from saying, all right, we're the enemy, because we're not. When I asked questions of presidents, I wanted an answer. Not for me to go home and say to my wife, hey, guess what I learned from the president? For my audience, for the ABC audience, for the people watching. I was just simply the conduit to get information to them. It wasn't a personal thing. And people used to think I disliked this president or I liked that president, depending on the question I might ask on a given day. And that's not true. When I covered Ronald Reagan, a lot of Republicans thought that I didn't like him, that I was against him, I was out to get him or something. And Democrats said, oh boy, thank goodness you're there. Keep old Bonzo on his toes or what. And then they sent me back to cover President Clinton, a Democrat. And now, during the Monica thing, the Democrats would say to me, what happened to you? You used to be a good reporter. Well, you must have just gotten rich on your salary and joined the country club or something. And some of the Republicans would say, well, you know something, I didn't like you at all. But I think with age comes wisdom. You've gotten a lot better. And I was the same guy. It depends on whose ox is being gored when you listen to a reporter's question. Unless you remember, it's not about the reporter or the president. It's about the truth. It's about the facts. It's about the president's desire to give an explanation on his actions to the public that the public likes and thinks is something that causes them to support him or her someday.
So not to, I don't want to put you in a position where you would criticize Acosta generally, but you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. You know, there's a lot of people that feel like he and other reporters are not taking that approach that you talked about, just in the search for answers, that they're grandstanding and those sorts of things. Do you think that's something the media needs to pay attention to?
Well, if someone watching a reporter can put aside the fact that the reporter may be saying something that they think they know as to be the facts that doesn't comport with that person's beliefs, and just say, I'm going to watch the reporter, how he or she acts and how he or she talks to politicians and all that. It's fair to complain about things that all of us do. I know when I was prominent at the White House, people used to accuse me, who didn't like what I was doing, as grandstanding. Hey, you're just out trying to grandstand and get a big salary and what have you. Well, I don't think it was grandstanding as a purpose of doing what I was doing. I was aware that being on television means I got to be known by my audience. I was aware that some people in the audience thought I did a good job, and when they would see me, oh, I have a picture with you, oh, yeah, this, that, and the other. I was aware that my boss, who thought I was doing a good job, was happy to give me a little raise from time to time. Sure. I don't call that grandstanding as the main purpose of being there. It was a byproduct of having this great opportunity, this lucky opportunity, to be in that position.
Last question, I appreciate your time. And it sort of builds on that, because there's a lot of, especially in Trump's base, that they don't like Jim.
Yeah.
They think he's all those things you talked about. He's out there for himself, and he's a bully and whatever. But I'm not sure that for the general public, what happened, that they really understand. I mean, what are we talking about is at stake when a press person, no matter who it is, has their White House access denied? Why is this important?
It's important because to deny the access of one reporter on the basis of you don't like him, because you think his questions are unfair, you don't like his style, you believe he's always asking questions that try to put you in a bad light. To deny him on that kind of basis is to deny the free press the ability to operate in a way that would serve the public. Now, if the reporter is off base constantly and does those things which makes the public believe that that reporter is out to get unfairly a president or anyone else, that reporter is not going to last. I used to tell people, if my boss at ABC believed that I was not really playing it straight, that my boss would know that the viewers of ABC would get that. They're not stupid. People are not dumb. and that I would cost the network viewers, and the advertising dollars could not be charged as high to advert. You see the way our system works, the capitalistic system, which I believe in, except of course for some of the bad things that are accessed by the greedy people in it. I'd be fired. I wouldn't keep my job. If I didn't play it just straight, I wouldn't keep my job. And I needed to pay my mortgage if that was my only reason. Now, I'd like to think that my reason for trying to play it straight was better than that. But there are many restraints on rogue reporters, on reporters that are not trying to play it straight. People say, well, you made a mistake. I said, yeah, I've made a number of mistakes as a reporter. I tried to correct them, you know, although the correction almost never catches up with the original mistake if you're on the air. Newspapers have a better chance, but still it doesn't catch up there. How can you be a perfect human being? I'm not one. I wasn't a perfect reporter. I sometimes got things wrong, but not because I intended to, not because I wanted to help this politician or hurt that politician, because I just didn't have enough moxie on a particular day or on a particular issue to get it absolutely right. But people tend not to grant that to those that they see as not doing things in the way they want it done, in their best interests. I fall back on the idea that if you have your faith invested in a president, you believe that person is doing a good job because that person is representing your values, representing your views, and trying to assuage your fears of what may be happening in this country. You do not immediately believe that someone who criticizes or brings information that is contrary to what you think the president is doing as a good job, you do not believe that person is playing it straight. You immediately want to assign it. Why, do you want to think that you're wrong about the president? Do you think you're wrong about having invested your belief in someone who turns out to be a con man or incompetent, or you think of it? No, of course not. It's human nature, and I understand that. But the American public will come around to a judgment on Donald Trump, as it did on every president that I've covered. Sometimes the judgment was immediately a plus. Other times, whether fair or unfair, it was, no, Jimmy Carter, go home. And the press doesn't control that. There was a long time that people said, oh, the press can manipulate and control politics and control who gets elected president. No, we can't. We can't, even if we tried. And the thing is that we don't try. We don't try. I never, while I was a reporter active in the business, gave a penny to any politician of any party, of every persuasion, made a speech for, publicly gave my views about the person. Now here in my native New Mexico, not being an active reporter, I feel free to lend myself to engaging in partisan politics in the sense of giving money to politicians I think would do a good job for New Mexico, and just announcing my support for them. I don't see anything wrong with that. That's what all Americans should do, including people who would disagree with me.